So, Prof. Akos, in your opinion, how are we in Ghana coping with the challenge of alternative lifestyles?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. Coping with quote unquote what you call alternative, or coping with change is always difficult for human beings. Because we get settled into what we are comfortable with. We get settled with what we are familiar with, and what we believe to be right. We establish our values. Sometimes we get comfortable with things that are not necessarily our values if we really reflect. But it's become like the status quo, and it's easier to kind of live with it than to try and bring about change. So I'm sure you both agree with me that very often, there are things that as Ghanaians we generally disagree with or frown upon. Um, Bribery and corruption, whether it's getting a driver's license or a passport or whatever it is. And someone will say, I don't tolerate. I've been trying to change ownership of a car so I can sell it for the last 6 years, and I have refused to go and pay anybody. So my journey has been difficult, and people tell me that I'm being silly, but I intend to see it through, right? So we develop the attitude that Ghana is anete. This is the way Ghana is, or you want to confront something, and people will ask you rather sarcastically and maybe judgingly that, are you not a Ghanaian? It's like, do you just come from another planet? You think that you alone, you're coming to change something here. So yes, we disagree with something, but the thought of how to change it becomes exhausting. And so people are like, let me just live with the status quo. So generally coping with change, it's not easy. It's not easy to do. It's challenging. And I think that the older we become, the more set we are in our ways and what we are familiar with. And so change can be scary. And especially when it's things that we do not fully understand, right? And if we are very honest with ourselves, as we look back from one generation to another, we realize that once upon a time we were young. Often we were also quite rebellious as far as the older generation were concerned. And, we seem to forget that. I remember many years ago, my brother, who's now in his 50s, was probably a young man in his 20s, and he came home with an earring in his ear. And my father lambasted him. It's like, if he had a yes, sir, we don't do that in this house. Ufi saying for Ufi, and where do you think you come from, and so on. And I asked my father, do you recollect the many narratives you have given us about, your own life as a student in London, and when you came back, and attire, and then bell bottoms came, and your father said that, well brought up young men didn't dress like this, platform shoes was another issue. So just think back on those times, and maybe do not be as judgmental about this young man with an earring in his ear. And I said, Daddy, this earring in his ear, will it change who he is? That and my father was generally a very liberal person. Of my parents, if we wanted to do anything that was off the beaten curve, we went to my father and not to my mother. So I think it's, coping with change generally is difficult. Coping with change when we think that there's a threat to an ordered system we believe in is even more difficult. And coping with change about things that we don't understand is also scary. So, this is why we do not cope well with new things, right? And I guess, the question is, what do we do then? But you didn't ask me that yet. So I will end and say that it's difficult. It's difficult to cope with change. It's difficult to look at our children doing things, dressing in certain ways that we find disapproving, that we disapprove of. And we have fears for their well-being. Sometimes we have genuine fears. Sometimes we haven't even thought about it clearly. And if they challenge us with questions as to actually what specifically about this action or dressing or interest of mine, troubles you, we have problems articulating it because we've actually not logically thought through it. But sometimes we do have genuine concerns. There's a young woman dressed a certain way. We may have concerns that it will attract undue attention to her. She might be sexually harassed or abused. We may have that genuine fear. Other times it's our pride about how we will be vicariously judged, or we'll be judged as good or bad parents because people will look at our children and say, hey, I saw Akosua's daughter. Did you see some short skirt that she was wearing?
Right.
And then I become the bad parent.